The night vision goggles turned the Afghan darkness into shades of green hell. Lieutenant Commander Jake "Hawk" Morrison held up his fist, and the six-man SEAL team froze instantly. They were deep in the Kunar province, a region so hostile that even hardened warriors called it the Valley of Death. Their mission was simple on paper: reconnaissance of a suspected Taliban weapons cache in a remote compound. Get in, gather intelligence, get out. Nobody fires a shot. Morrison's instincts screamed danger. Something felt wrong about this place. The compound sat in a bowl-shaped valley, surrounded by steep ridges that created perfect kill zones. Ancient mud brick walls formed a maze of corridors and rooms. Too quiet, too perfect. 20 years of combat experience told Morrison they were walking into a trap, but the intelligence was solid. A high-value weapons shipment had reportedly arrived here 3 hours ago. RPGs, heavy machine guns, possibly even anti-aircraft missiles stolen from the Afghan National Army. "Chief, what do you think?" Morrison whispered to Senior Chief Tom Davis, his second-in-command and closest friend for 15 years. Davis scanned the compound through his scope, his weathered face tense. "Don't like it, Hawk. Feels staged. But if those weapons are real and we don't confirm it, they could hit our bases within days." Morrison nodded. The weight of command pressed down on him. Every decision could mean life or death for his men. "All right, standard breach. Chen, you're on point. Davis, rear security. Nobody gets trigger happy. We're ghosts tonight." Petty Officer Michael Chen, the team's youngest member at 24, moved forward with his rifle raised. They'd done this dance 100 times, clearing rooms, gathering intelligence, vanishing before the enemy knew they were there. Chen reached the compound's outer wall and signaled clear. That's when the world exploded. The IED detonated directly beneath Chen's position at exactly 3:17 hours. The blast was massive, coordinated, designed to channel the team into a predetermined kill zone. Chen flew backward, his body armor shredded, screaming as he hit the ground. Morrison's training took over. He sprinted forward through the smoke and debris, grabbing Chen's drag handle, pulling him toward cover. Then the machine guns opened up. Tracer rounds cut through the darkness like laser beams, coming from 3 different positions on the ridgelands above. They'd been watching, waiting, letting the SEALs get deep into the trap before springing it. Morrison dragged Chen behind a low wall as bullets chewed apart the earth around them. "Contact, contact, multiple shooters on the high ground," Davis shouted into the radio, returning fire in controlled bursts. "We need immediate air support and CASEVAC. 1 wounded." The response crackled back, filled with static, negative on air support. Massive dust storm rolling in. "All birds are grounded. You're on your own for at least 2 hours. 2 hours might as well be 2 years. Morrison applied a tourniquet to Chen's mangled leg, working by feel in the darkness while bullets snapped overhead. The kid was going into shock, his face pale, teeth chattering despite the desert heat. "Stay with me, Chen. You're going home, you hear me? You're going to see that baby girl of yours." More fighters poured into the compound. Morrison counted at least 20, maybe 30. They'd completely underestimated the enemy presence. This wasn't a weapons cache. This was a Taliban stronghold, and they'd advertised the weapons specifically to lure in American special operations. "We're surrounded," Petty Officer Jackson called out, firing from behind a crumbling fountain. "They're blocking all the exits." Morrison's mind raced through scenarios. They were outnumbered, outgunned, with 1 critically wounded man and no air support. The compound's layout forced them into a defensive position with no good escape routes. He keyed his radio. "All stations, tighten the perimeter. Conserve ammunition. We hold until extraction." An RPG streaked through the darkness and slammed into the wall beside Morrison. The explosion lifted him off his feet and threw him 15 feet through the air. He crashed into a pile of rubble, his world spinning, ears ringing so loud he couldn't hear his own screaming. Pain erupted in his left leg. He looked down and saw his knee bent sideways, bone visible through torn flesh. Davis was there instantly, dragging Morrison into cover. "Hawk, Commander, stay with me." Morrison's vision blurred, but he could see the panic in his men's eyes. They were looking at him for answers, for hope, for a miracle. He'd led them into this trap. He had to get them out. "Legs broken," Morrison gasped, tasting blood. "Davis, you're in command. Get the team out." "Not without you, sir. We all go home or none of us do." Another explosion rocked the compound. Morrison checked his ammunition, 2 magazines left. He looked at his team, these warriors he'd trained with, fought with, bled with. Chen was dying. Morrison couldn't walk. And the Taliban was closing in from all sides, confident now, taking their time, knowing the Americans had nowhere to run. "Ammo check," Davis ordered. The responses came back, each one worse than the last. They were down to their last magazines, grenades nearly depleted. Themeth was brutal and simple. They had maybe 10 minutes of ammunition left against an enemy that could afford to wait. Morrison had faced death before, but never like this. Never with the certainty that he'd failed his men, led them to slaughter in a forgotten valley halfway around the world. That's when the first impossible shot rang out across the valley, and everything changed. The Taliban machine gunner on the eastern ridge had been hammering their position for 3 straight minutes, his PKM spitting death in long, sustained bursts that kept the SEALs pinned down. Senior Chief Davis had tried twice to get an angle on him, but the fighter was well protected behind a rock formation, only exposing himself for seconds at a time. Morrison pressed his back against the bullet-scarred wall, his shattered leg screaming with every movement. Through his fading consciousness, he heard his men's desperate radio calls, the dwindling ammunition reports, the reality that they were in their final minutes. Chen had stopped screaming, either unconscious or dead, Morrison couldn't tell. Davis leaned over him. "Hawk, I need you to listen. We're going to create a diversion. Jackson and I will draw their fire while the others get you and Chen to that dried riverbed 200 meters north. It's our only shot." Morrison grabbed Davis's vest with weakening fingers. "That's a suicide run, Tom." "Yeah, well, somebody's got to buy the time." Davis managed a grim smile. "Besides, my wife's been nagging me about life insurance. Finally, gonna make it worth her while." Before Morrison could protest, the machine gunner's head exploded. Not from American fire. The shot came from somewhere far beyond the compound, a distance so extreme that the sound of the rifle report arrived a full second after the kill. The PKM went silent, its operator slumped over the weapon, his skull opened by a bullet that had traveled nearly 900 meters. "What the?" Davis spun, trying to locate the shooter. Another shot cracked through the valley. A Taliban fighter who'd been advancing on their position dropped instantly, a perfect centermass hit at over 800 meters. Then another fell, and another. Each shot was impossibly accurate, impossibly distant, coming from somewhere in the mountain darkness like the hand of God reaching down to smite their enemies. "We've got Guardian Angel," Jackson shouted, using the term for unexpected sniper support. "Someone's lighting them up." The Taliban fighters scattered in confusion, their coordinated assault dissolving into chaos. They'd been hunting Navy SEALs, but now they were being hunted by something they couldn't see, couldn't locate, couldn't fight. The psychological effect was devastating. Hardened warriors who'd faced American firepower for years suddenly broke and ran for cover. Morrison counted the shots. 7, 8, 9. Each one a kill, no misses, no wasted ammunition. Whoever was behind that rifle was operating at a level beyond anything he'd seen in 2 decades of warfare. The shots were coming so fast and so accurately that it seemed impossible for one person to be acquiring, calculating, and executing at this pace. "Chief, the RPG team on the West Ridge," Petty Officer Rodriguez called out. Davis saw them too, 3 fighters setting up a launcher that would turn their defensive position into a crater. The range was over 1,000 meters, the shooters partially concealed behind rocks, an impossible shot even for the best marksmen. The mysterious sniper made it anyway. The RPG gunner's chest erupted before he could fire. His loader took the next round through the throat. The third man tried to run and made it exactly 4 steps before a bullet found him. 3 targets, 3 kills, executed in less than 8 seconds. Whoever that is, they're giving us a corridor. Davis analyzed the pattern of kills. Northwest toward that riverbed. They're clearing a path. Morrison forced himself to focus through the pain. The shots were creating a specific safe zone, systematically eliminating any Taliban fighter who could threaten a northern retreat. It wasn't random suppressive fire. This was precise, calculated, almost orchestrated. Someone out there wasn't just saving their lives, they were directing their escape. "Move now," Morrison ordered, his commander's voice cutting through despite his injuries. "Chen first, then establish security in that riverbed. Go, go, go." Jackson and Rodriguez grabbed Chen's limp form and sprinted into the darkness. More shots rang out, each one dropping an enemy fighter who tried to intercept them. It was like watching a master surgeon at work, every movement deliberate, every cut precise, no wasted motion. Davis hauled Morrison up, the pain nearly causing him to black out. "Come on, Hawk. Our angel didn't do all this work for you to give up now." They moved as fast as Morrison's destroyed leg allowed, half running, half dragging through the compound. Taliban fighters appeared in windows, in doorways, on rooftops, and every single one was eliminated before they could fire. The mysterious sniper was providing protection so complete it seemed supernatural. A fighter popped up from behind a wall directly in their path, AK-47 raised. Morrison couldn't shoot, couldn't move fast enough. He watched the man's finger tighten on the trigger, accepting that this was how it ended. The bullet took the fighter through the eye socket, from nearly 1,200 meters away. They reached the dried riverbed and collapsed into its relative safety. The steep banks provided cover, and the sniper had eliminated every enemy with line of sight to their position. For the first time in 20 minutes, they weren't taking fire. Morrison did a head count. All 6 SEALs had made it, though Chen was barely breathing and Morrison himself was fatting fast. They'd survived what should have been a massacre. "Who is that?" Rodriguez whispered, staring out into the darkness. "Who shoots like that?" Davis was studying the shot angles, the distances, the impossible precision. He'd worked with the best snipers in the military, Marine Scout snipers, Army Rangers, Delta Force precision marksmen. Nobody he knew could perform at this level. "I don't know," Davis admitted, "but whoever they are, they just saved our lives, and they're coming closer." Through his night vision, Morrison saw a single figure moving across the mountain terrain with the confidence of someone who owned the battlefield. Alone, unhurried, a ghost materializing from the Afghanistan darkness. Their savior was coming to collect them, and Morrison had the strangest feeling that their night was far from over. The SEALs formed a hasty defensive perimeter in the dried riverbed, weapons trained on the approaching figure. Despite having just been saved, every man knew that in Afghanistan, trust could get you killed. The mountains were full of stories about fighters who'd switched sides, about traps within traps. 50 meters and closing, Davis whispered, his finger resting on the trigger guard. Single hostile, no single person, moving tactical. Morrison tried to prop himself up against the riverbank, but the pain in his shattered leg was overwhelming. Chen lay beside him, unconscious, his breathing shallow and irregular. They needed medical evacuation within hours or they'd lose him. They might lose Morrison too. He could feel the shock setting in, his body temperature dropping despite the desert heat. 40 meters, Rodriguez updated. They're not trying to hide, walking straight toward us. Through the green haze of night vision, Morrison watched the figure approach with a stride that spoke of absolute confidence. No hesitation, no fear. The person carried a long rifle, looked like a .338 Lapua Magnum sniper system, and moved with the efficiency of someone who'd spent years in these mountains. 30 meters, Chief, what do we do? Davis made a decision. Hold fire, but keep your sights on them. Let's see what we've got. At 20 meters, the figure stopped and called out in a clear, unmistakably American voice. Friendly approaching. Former Marine Scout sniper, currently attached to JSOC. Lower your weapons before someone gets nervous and ruins my good mood. The voice was female. The SEALs exchanged glances. A woman sniper, out here alone, operating in one of the most hostile regions of Afghanistan. Identify yourself, Davis commanded. Rank, name, and unit. Staff Sergeant Riley McKenna, Marine Corps, call sign Reaper. And fellas, I'm the reason you're still breathing, so maybe a little gratitude before the interrogation. Davis lowered his weapon slightly, approached slowly, hands visible. Riley McKenna walked into their perimeter, and even in the darkness, Morrison could see why legends grew around certain warriors. She was maybe 5'7", lean and hard as the mountain rock, with shoulder-length dark hair pulled back in a tactical bun. Her face was streaked with camouflage paint and dirt, eyes like chips of ice that had seen too much death. She carried herself with the casual competence of someone who'd made peace with violence long ago. But it was the rifle that made Morrison's eyes widen. A custom .338 Lapua with modifications he'd never seen before, worn from use but meticulously maintained. The optics alone probably cost more than his truck back home. Reaper, Jackson breathed. Holy shit, you're actually real. Riley's mouth quirked in something that might have been a smile. The reports of my fictional status have been greatly exaggerated. She knelt beside Morrison and Chen, assessing their wounds with practiced efficiency. Commander's got a compound fracture, severe blood loss, early-stage shock. The kid's worse, penetrating trauma to the femoral region, possible internal bleeding. You've got maybe 10 hours to get them to a field hospital, probably less. She worked while she talked, checking pulses, examining wounds, her hands steady and sure. Morrison studied her face and suddenly placed the name. Reaper. The ghost sniper who'd been operating in the Hindu Kush for the past 18 months. The stories were wild, probably exaggerated, but if even half of them were true. You're the Marine who held off an entire Taliban company at Firebase Python, Morrison said, his voice weak. 63 confirmed kills in one night. 67, Riley corrected without looking up. But who's counting? She pulled out her medical kit and started an IV line on Morrison with the skill of a combat medic. You're Jake Morrison, right? The SEAL commander who pulled off that hostage rescue in Helmand. Read about it in the briefing reports. Good work. What are you doing out here alone? Davis asked, his tactical mind already questioning the situation. Marine snipers work in teams. Where's your spotter? Something dark flickered across Riley's face. Don't have one anymore. The way she said it closed the subject like a door slamming shut. Davis was smart enough not to push. Riley finished with Morrison's IV and moved to Chen. This kid's not going to make it if we just sit here. You called for CASEVAC. Denied, Davis said bitterly. Dust storm grounded all aircraft for at least 2 hours. We're on our own. 2 hours is too long. Riley checked her watch and Morrison saw scars crisscrossing her hands, burn marks, shrapnel wounds, the price of her profession. But that's not your biggest problem right now. What do you mean? Rodriguez asked. Riley gestured toward the ridgelines surrounding them. You walked into a trap set by a local Taliban commander named Khalid Mansur. He's been setting up ambushes like this for months, using false intelligence to lure in special operations teams. You're the third group he's tried it on. The first 2 didn't make it out. Morrison felt ice in his veins. How do you know about Mansur? Because I've been hunting him for the past 3 weeks. Riley's eyes hardened to something beyond cold. He's not just running ambushes. Intelligence intercepts suggest he's coordinating a major attack on forward operating base Lightning, 3 suicide vehicle bombs, insider threats, the whole nightmare scenario. We're talking 312 American troops at risk. Davis processed this. So you're on a target interdiction mission. Why break cover to help us? Because I'm a Marine and I don't leave Americans to die if I can help it. Riley stood, scanning the surrounding darkness with senses honed by endless combat. But we've got a problem. Mansur's compound is 5 clicks from here, and I've finally got a window to take him down. Tonight. Within the next 3 hours, or he disappears into Pakistan and that attack happens. Morrison understood immediately. You're saying you can save my men or stop the attack, but not both. That's exactly what I'm saying. Riley looked at him directly, and Morrison saw the weight she carried, the impossible choices, the calculations of lives saved versus lives lost, the burden that came with being exceptional at killing. I've tracked Mansur through 4 provinces. This is the closest I've ever been. If I call off my mission to help evacuate you, hundreds die within days. If I complete my mission, your commander and that kid might not survive the wait. The riverbed fell silent except for Chen's labored breathing. Morrison looked at his men, warriors he'd trained with, fought beside, would die for. Then he thought about the 300 soldiers at Fob Lightning, men and women who had no idea death was coming for them. How good are you really? Morrison asked Riley. She met his eyes without arrogance, without false modesty. Best you've ever seen, Commander. I don't miss when it matters. Morrison made his decision. It was probably going to kill him, but some things mattered more than survival. Then you take 4 of my men and complete your mission. 2 stay here to keep me and Chen alive. That's an order. Davis started to protest, but Morrison cut him off with a look. Riley studied Morrison for a long moment, then nodded with respect. You're making the right call, even if it costs you everything. She checked her rifle, all business now. Chief Davis, I need your 4 best shooters. We move in 10 minutes. This is going to get ugly. Silence in the riverbed was heavy with the weight of Morrison's decision. Davis stared at his commander, his friend, the man who'd pulled him out of a burning helicopter in Fallujah and stood as best man at his wedding. Now Morrison was ordering him to leave him behind, to bleed out in an Afghan riverbed. Hawk, this is insane, Davis said quietly, kneeling beside Morrison. We don't leave our own, that's the code, that's everything we stand for. Morrison gripped Davis's arm with weakening strength. The code also says we protect American lives. 300 troops, Tom, 300, do the math. Riley was already planning, studying a tactical map on her weatherproof tablet. Mansur's compound is in a village called Darya Khan, 5 kilometers northeast through some of the worst terrain in the province. He's got at least 30 fighters with him, maybe more. The building is a fortified compound with multiple defensive positions. She looked up at the seals. I've been observing his patterns for weeks. He appears on a second-floor balcony every morning at 6:30 to pray. That's a 4-second window. After that, he's surrounded by human shields, women, children, civilians he deliberately keeps close. The morning window is our only clean shot. Rodriguez checked his watch. That's less than 3 hours from now. Which is why we need to move now, Riley said. The approach alone will take 2 hours if we're careful. And we need to be careful. Mansur has patrols, spotters, and enough firepower to turn this into a suicide mission if we're detected. Jackson looked between Morrison and Riley, his young face torn. Sir, I should stay with you. I'm the medic. Chen needs you to make sure his daughter grows up in a world where terrorists don't blow up American bases, Morrison interrupted, his voice firm despite the pain. Rodriguez and Petty Officer Williams stay with us. The rest of you go with Reaper. That's final. Williams, a quiet Texan who rarely spoke but could shoot like he was born with a rifle, simply nodded his acceptance. Rodriguez looked like he wanted to argue but knew it was pointless. Riley assessed the team she'd been given. Davis, Jackson, and 2 others, Petty Officer Marcus Blake, an explosives expert, and Petty Officer Kevin Santos, their communications specialist. Not ideal numbers for what she had planned, but these were Navy SEALs. They'd do. "Before we go," Davis said, turning to Riley with hard eyes, "I need to know who you really are. The stories about Reaper. Some of them sound like bullshit. The 1,400-meter kill shot in a sandstorm. The compound raid where you held off 50 Taliban fighters alone for 6 hours. Firebase Python. Are they true?" Riley met his gaze without flinching. Firebase Python was real. 72 confirmed kills that night, not 67. I miscounted in the dark. The compound raid was 43 fighters, not 50, and it was 4 hours, not 6. The 1,400-meter shot in a sandstorm happened, but I had to take it 3 times before I compensated for the wind correctly. The first 2 missed. She paused. The stories get exaggerated, but the core truth is this. I've been doing this for 8 years, and I'm still alive while most people who tried to kill me aren't. Good enough. Blake whistled low. Good enough for me. "There's something else you should know," Riley continued, her voice dropping. "My spotter, the Marine who worked with me for 3 years. His name was Captain David McKenna. He was also my husband." She saw the recognition in their faces, the understanding of why she worked alone now, why she pushed so hard. "We were running Overwatch on a convoy in Helmand Province 9 months ago. IED got him. I was 50 meters away, watching through my scope, completely helpless." The riverbed was silent, except for Chen's labored breathing. "After David died, I volunteered for every dangerous assignment JSOC offered. Some people call it a death wish. I call it making his sacrifice count. Every terrorist I eliminate is one less threat to our troops, one less widow, one less funeral." Riley's jaw tightened. "Mansur's network has killed 17 Americans in the past 4 months. The attack he's planning will kill hundreds more. So yeah, I'm motivated." Morrison understood that kind of pain, that need to make meaning from loss. "Reaper, when this is done, when you take that shot, what happens to you?" Riley smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Honestly, Commander, I haven't thought that far ahead. I stopped planning for a future about 9 months ago." She stood, checking her rifle one final time. "But right now, I've got a job to do, and you've given me 4 good men to help do it. Let's make sure your sacrifice means something." Davis pulled Morrison aside while Riley briefed the others. "Hawk, if this goes wrong." "It won't. That woman is the real deal, Tom. I can see it. She's carrying death in her eyes, but she's also carrying purpose. Trust her." "I trust her," Davis said. "I'm just not sure I trust this plan. We're leaving you and Chen with 2 men, minimal ammo, no air support, and enemy patrols probably still searching for us. If Mansur's people find you before we get back." Morrison clasped his friend's hand. "Then you make damn sure you complete the mission. You make sure those 300 troops at Lightning get to go home. You make sure Chen's daughter gets to know her father's name, even if he doesn't make it. That's all that matters now." Riley appeared beside them, her presence commanding despite her size. "Last chance to change your mind, Commander. I can try to call in favors, push for emergency extraction." "No," Morrison said firmly. "We do this right, you stop Mansur. My men and I will hold here until you're done, however long it takes." Riley studied him for a moment, then did something unexpected. She removed a patch from her uniform, a worn Marine Scout sniper insignia that looked like it had been through hell and back. She pressed it into Morrison's hand. "David wore this through 2 deployments," she said quietly. "It kept him alive until it didn't. Maybe it'll do better for you." Before Morrison could respond, she turned to the strike team. "All right, gentlemen, let's move. We've got a monster to hunt and not a lot of time to do it." Davis took one last look at Morrison, and then the 5 warriors melted into the darkness, leaving Morrison, Chen, Rodriguez, and Williams alone in the riverbed with their dwindling medical supplies and even less ammunition. Rodriguez checked Chen's pulse and shook his head slightly. The kid was fatting fast. Morrison clutched Riley's patch and watched the mountains swallow his rescue team. In 3 hours, either Mansur would be dead and hundreds of Americans would be saved, or Riley's mission would fail and everything would have been for nothing. The dice were thrown. Now all they could do was survive long enough to see how they landed. Riley moved through the Afghan mountains like a predator returning to familiar hunting grounds. The terrain was brutal, steep inclines, loose shale that could give away their position, and countless places where enemy scouts could be hiding. But she navigated it all with the confidence of someone who'd memorized every rock and shadow during weeks of solitary reconnaissance. Davis followed close behind, impressed despite himself. The woman moved with absolute economy of motion, never wasting energy, her breathing controlled even on the steepest climbs. Behind him, Jackson, Blake, and Santos struggled to keep pace. They were Navy SEALs, among the most elite warriors on the planet, but Riley operated on a different level entirely. After 30 minutes of brutal climbing, Riley held up a fist and dropped into cover behind a boulder formation. The team immediately went prone, weapons ready. She pointed to a ridgeline 200 meters ahead where 3 Taliban fighters sat smoking, their AK-47s propped against rocks. Sentries. Riley glassed them through her scope, studying their positions, their sight lines, their fields of fire. Davis watched her work, the way her breathing slowed, how she became absolutely still, reading the environment like others read books. 3 targets, multiple approach vectors, she whispered. We can bypass them, add 20 minutes to our timeline, or we can eliminate them silently and maintain our schedule. Your call, Chief. Davis considered. 20 minutes could mean the difference between Morrison surviving or bleeding out, but engaging meant risk of alerting other patrols. Can you guarantee silent kills at this range? Riley's eyes never left her scope. 200 meters minimal wind, stationary targets. Yes, I can guarantee it. Then drop them. Riley made 3-minute adjustments to her scope, accounting for elevation and the slight breeze coming down the valley. Then she fired 3 times in rapid succession. Pop, 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 the suppressed rifle making no more noise than a hammer striking wood. All 3 sentries collapsed before the sound could reach them, before they could comprehend they were under attack, before they could warn anyone. Jesus Christ, Santos breathed. I've never seen shooting like that. You still haven't seen shooting, Riley said, already moving forward. That was target practice. Wait until it gets difficult. They continued climbing, and as they moved, Riley began to talk. Not the idle chatter of nervous warriors, but something different, like she needed to speak, to make them understand who she was and why she did what she did. David and I met at Camp Lejeune, she said, navigating a narrow path along a cliff edge. I was one of 3 women trying to qualify for Scout sniper training. The instructors didn't think I'd make it past the first week. David was assigned as my spotter, and I think it was supposed to be a joke. Pair the woman with the pretty boy officer, let them both wash out together. Blake nearly slipped on loose rock, and Riley caught his arm without breaking stride. What happened? I outshot everyone in my class, including David, set a course record that still stands. The instructors didn't know what to do with me. Riley smiled at the memory. David, though, he wasn't threatened. He was fascinated, said he'd never seen anyone read wind the way I could, like I was talking to it instead of fighting it. We became partners. Then we became more. They crested a ridge, and Riley immediately signaled for cover. A Taliban patrol, 5 men, passed less than 100 meters below, moving through a dry creek bed. The team froze, barely breathing, while Riley tracked them through her scope. The patrol passed without detecting them. 3 years we worked together, Riley continued once they moved again. 17 deployments, 139 confirmed kills, never lost a target. We were so synchronized we barely needed to talk. He'd spot, I'd shoot, and it was like a dance we'd practiced for lifetimes. Jackson spoke up quietly. What happened in Helmand? Riley's pace didn't change, but Davis saw her shoulders tighten. We were providing overwatch for a supply convoy routine mission. I was positioned on a hillside. David was in a building 2 blocks away calling wind conditions. The convoy passed, everything looked clear. Then David said he saw something: suspicious civilians, wrong body language. He called for the convoy to halt. She paused at an overlook, checking their position against her map. 2 more kilometers to the target compound. They were making good time. David went down to check it out himself. That's who he was, couldn't ask others to take risks he wouldn't take. I was watching through my scope, covering him. He was talking to a woman with a baby. Seemed fine. Then the baby's blanket fell away and I saw the detonation cord. The night seemed to grow colder around them. I had maybe half a second to react. I could see the trigger in her hand. I could have taken the shot, but David was too close. If she had a dead man's switch, the blast would kill him anyway. I froze. For the first and only time in my career, I froze. Riley's voice stayed steady, but Davis heard the pain underneath. The IED was buried under the street. It vaporized David and 3 Marines. I watched the whole thing happen, completely powerless. Santos looked away, unable to meet her eyes. That's not your fault. Isn't it? Riley's laugh was bitter. I had the shot, I had the skill, I had the position, but I couldn't pull the trigger because it was him, because I loved him more than I loved the mission, and that hesitation killed him. They moved in silence for several minutes, each man processing what she'd revealed. Finally, Davis spoke. Is that why you work alone now? Because you think you can't trust yourself with a partner? I work alone because I won't risk anyone else, Riley corrected. The mission always costs something. Usually it costs the enemy. Sometimes it costs us. David's death taught me that the only person I have the right to sacrifice is myself. Blake gestured to the 4 of them. But you're working with us now. Because Commander Morrison made a choice, Riley said. He decided his life and his men's lives were worth trading for the mission. That's not sacrifice, that's mathematics. Cold, brutal, necessary mathematics. 300 troops at FOB Lightning versus 6 SEALs in a riverbed. The equation is simple. Nothing simple about it, Davis argued. Morrison's got a wife and 2 kids. Chen's got a newborn daughter. Every one of those 300 troops is somebody's son or daughter, husband or wife. How do you calculate which lives matter more? Riley stopped and turned to face them. In the starlight, her face was hard as the mountain stone. You don't calculate which lives matter more, Chief. You calculate which deaths accomplish more. Morrison understands that. It's why he's a good commander. It's why he gave the order even though it might kill him. She pointed toward the valley ahead where Khalid Mansur's compound sat in darkness, fortified and guarded, waiting for dawn. In 3 hours, I'm going to take a shot that will save hundreds of American lives. Maybe thousands, if Mansur's attack triggers the response he's hoping for. That shot will echo across this whole region. Taliban commanders will know that nobody is untouchable, that even their best protected leaders can die in an instant. Riley checked her rifle, her movements ritual and precise. But if I miss, if Mansur survives, then Morrison's sacrifice means nothing. Chen dies for nothing. Your commander bleeds out in a riverbed for nothing. That's what I carry every time I pull the trigger, not just the weight of the kill, but the weight of every choice that led to that moment. Davis studied this woman, this weapon the Marines had forged from grief and skill and unbreakable determination. You really think you can make that shot? It's 1,200 meters, uncertain wind, a 4-second window with a target surrounded by civilians. One mistake and either you miss or you kill innocents. Riley's eyes were cold and certain. I told you before, Chief. I don't miss when it matters. David taught me that. He taught me a lot of things before the end. She turned back toward their objective. Now let's finish what we came here to do. We've got a monster waiting and dawn comes whether we're ready or not. They moved forward into the darkness. 5 warriors bound by an impossible mission, and the knowledge that failure meant Morrison's sacrifice would haunt them forever. They reached the overwatch position at 5:42 hours, with 48 minutes until Mansur's morning prayer. The spot Riley had chosen was a rocky outcrop on a hillside that offered an unobstructed view of the compound while remaining concealed from patrols. It was perfect, which meant getting to it had been hell. The final approach had required them to low crawl for 300 meters past an enemy checkpoint, moving inches at a time through thorny scrub brush that tore at their skin and gear. Blake had nearly been spotted when a patrol dog caught their scent, but Riley had produced a small packet of spices from her kit, something local she'd learned masked human smell, and scattered it downwind. The dog had sneezed and lost interest. Now they lay in position, and Riley was transforming into something other than human. Davis watched as she assembled her rifle with movements so practiced they seemed unconscious. Every component clicked into place with mechanical precision. She arranged her shooting mat, set out spare magazines, positioned her rangefinder and wind meter within easy reach. Then she became perfectly still, controlling her breathing, slowing her heart rate, entering what snipers called the zone. Through his spotting scope, Davis studied the target compound. It was a typical Afghan fortified structure, high mud brick walls, narrow windows, internal courtyard. 3 stories tall with a flat roof where 2 guards paced with PKM machine guns. Mansur's balcony was on the 2nd floor, facing east to catch the rising sun during morning prayers. "Range?" Riley asked, her voice flat and emotionless. Santos checked his laser rangefinder. 1,247 meters to the balcony. Jesus, that's over 3/4 of a mile. "Wind?" Riley asked. Davis studied the environmental indicators, dust patterns, vegetation movement, heat shimmer. Variable, 3 to 5 miles per hour from the southwest, but there's some swirl coming through the valley. It's going to shift. "I know," Riley said. She was looking through her scope now, reading the same signs Davis was seeing but interpreting them on some deeper level. The sun hits that eastern slope at approximately 6:25. Thermal rise creates an updraft. Wind velocity increases by 2 miles per hour for exactly 6 minutes. At 6:31, it stabilizes. That's my window. Jackson stared at her. "You've timed the wind patterns." "I've been watching this compound for 3 weeks," Riley said. "I know when the guards change shifts, when the cook starts breakfast, when the women hang laundry, when the children play in the courtyard. I know that Mansur takes his tea at 6:15, walks to his balcony at 6:29, and begins his prayer at 6:30. He faces east, eyes closed, completely still for approximately 4 seconds. Then he opens his eyes, sees the sunrise, and goes back inside. 4 seconds. That's all I get." Blake was setting up a small tablet, monitoring Taliban radio chatter. "They're not talking about us. I think we got here clean." "Of course we did," Riley said without arrogance, just stating fact. "I've walked this route a dozen times. I know where every sentry position is, every patrol route, every dead zone in their security. Mansur thinks he's untouchable here. That's going to get him killed." The sky began to lighten, that pre-dawn glow that turned the Afghan mountains from black to deep purple. In the compound below, lights flickered on. People began moving, guards, servants, the machinery of a Taliban commander's daily routine. Davis felt the tension building. This was the moment every operator lived for and dreaded, when all the planning came down to execution, when theory became reality, when you found out if you were good enough or just lucky. "Target compound coming alive," Davis reported. "Multiple personnel visible. Rooftop guards are alert, I see. Wait, there's women and children in the courtyard. Riley, there's civilians everywhere." "I know," Riley said calmly. "Mansur always keeps them close. Human shields. He learned it from watching American rules of engagement. We won't take a shot if civilians are at risk. It's why every other attempt to kill him has failed." Santos looked nervous. "So how do we?" "The balcony is separate from the courtyard," Riley interrupted. "When he steps out to pray, he's alone. Clear line of sight, no civilians in the kill zone. It's the only moment he's vulnerable, and he only gives me 4 seconds. Jackson checked his watch. 20 minutes. Riley made microscopic adjustments to her scope, then went through her pre-shot ritual. She was checking the rifle, yes, but Davis realized she was really checking herself, making sure her body was ready, her mind was clear, her focus was absolute. This was meditation as much as preparation. "I'm going to tell you something," Riley said quietly, her eye pressed to the scope. "Every shot I've ever taken, I've asked myself the same question. Is this worth it? Is this kill worth the cost? Worth the resources, the risk, the moral weight?" And Davis asked. David used to say that doubt was good. It meant we were human. It meant we weren't just killers, we were warriors making hard choices. Riley's voice was steady as stone. "This shot is worth it. Mansour has killed 17 Americans, radicalized hundreds of fighters, and he's planning an attack that will kill hundreds more. The math is clear. The moral equation balances. This is why I'm here." The sun crept higher. The compound bustled with morning activity. Guards changed positions. A woman carried water across the courtyard. Children chased a goat. "10 minutes," Santos whispered. Riley checked her wind meter one last time, made a fractional adjustment to her scope, and settled into her final shooting position. Her breathing slowed to almost nothing. Her body became part of the rock, part of the mountain, part of the landscape itself. Davis had worked with snipers his entire career, but he'd never seen anyone achieve this level of focus. Riley, McKenna wasn't just aiming a rifle, she was becoming the weapon itself. "Movement on the balcony," Blake said tensely. "Doors opening." Through his spotting scope, Davis saw a figure emerge. Male, bearded, wearing traditional robes. Was it Mansour? The intelligence photos were years old. Davis felt his pulse spike. "That's not him," Riley said with absolute certainty. "That's a bodyguard checking the balcony. Mansour's security protocol. He always sends someone out first." The bodyguard looked around, scanned the surrounding hillsides with binoculars, then retreated inside. Davis realized he'd been holding his breath. "5 minutes," Jackson said. Riley's finger rested beside the trigger guard, not on it. Not yet. She was a coiled spring, storing energy, waiting for the precise moment to release. The compound fell into a strange stillness. Even the children stopped playing, called inside by their mothers. This was the sacred time, the moment before morning prayer when the faithful prepared to face their God. "Movement," Davis said. "Balcony door, this is it." Khalid Mansour stepped into the dawn light. Davis's scope brought him into sharp focus. Tall, perhaps 50 years old, his beard streaked with gray. Intelligent eyes that had planned the deaths of countless innocents. Hands that had ordered torture, executions, suicide attacks. He wore simple robes, but there was nothing humble about his bearing. He carried himself like a man who believed he was chosen by God to wage war. Mansour positioned himself facing east, closed his eyes, and began to pray. "Wind steady," Davis called. 3.5 miles per hour southwest. Riley's breathing stopped entirely. The moment stretched like taffy, time itself seeming to slow. Davis could hear his own heartbeat, the distant call of a bird, the whisper of wind through the rocks. Riley squeezed the trigger. The .338 Lapua Magnum round exploded from the barrel at 2,700 feet per second. It flew through the Afghan dawn, covering 1,247 meters in less than 2 seconds, a precisely calculated arc that accounted for distance, wind, elevation, even the Earth's rotation. The bullet never deviated, never wavered, flying true as prophecy. Khalid Mansour's head snapped back. He dropped like a puppet with cut strings, dead before he heard the shot, dead before his guards could react, dead before he could finish the prayer that was supposed to protect him. "Hit confirmed," Davis said, his voice tight. "Target down, he's not getting up." For one perfect moment the valley was silent. Then all hell broke loose. Alarms sounded in the compound. Guards poured onto the roof, firing blindly in all directions. Taliban fighters erupted from buildings, shouting, panicking, trying to understand how their untouchable commander had just been killed. "They've got our position," Blake shouted as bullets started impacting nearby. "They're zeroing in on the muzzle flash." Riley was already moving, breaking down her rifle with the same mechanical precision she'd assembled it. "Time to leave, gentlemen. Our work here is done." "They're mobilizing everyone," Santos said, listening to the radio chatter explode with frantic orders. "Every fighter in the valley is coming for us." Davis looked at the compound below, now swarming with armed men, then at the mountains around them where hundreds of enemy fighters were about to converge. They just killed one of the most protected Taliban commanders in Afghanistan, and now they had to escape through hostile territory with an entire army hunting them. Riley finished packing her gear and met his eyes. There was no fear there, no doubt, only the cold calculation of someone who'd planned for exactly this scenario. "Chief," she said with that fierce, untamed smile, "now comes the hard part." Mountain exploded with gunfire. Hundreds of Taliban fighters poured out of villages and compounds like disturbed hornets, converging on the hillside where Riley had taken her shot. The radio chatter Blake monitored was frantic, rage-filled. Mansour had been more than a commander. He'd been a symbol, a legend in his own right. His death demanded blood vengeance. "We've got approximately 4 minutes before they overrun this position," Riley said, moving down the slope with controlled urgency. "They know the general area of the shot, but not our exact position yet. That advantage won't last." Davis followed, pulling Santos along. "What's the exfil plan?" "There isn't one," Riley admitted. "I was supposed to take the shot and disappear alone. 5 people are harder to hide than one." "That's a terrible plan," Jackson said, sliding on loose shale. "It's kept me alive for 18 months, Riley countered. She stopped at an outcropping and scanned the valley through her rangefinder. "But we adapt. See that ridgeline northwest? There's a goat path that leads to a seasonal creek bed. We follow that for 2 clicks, then cut through a series of abandoned compounds. It'll take us 3 hours to loop back to your commander's position, assuming we survive the next 20 minutes. Blake was still monitoring comms. "They're coordinating a sweep pattern. At least 50 fighters moving toward us from multiple directions. Some are already on the hillside below us." Riley unslung her rifle. "Then we give them something to think about." She dropped prone, acquired a target through her scope, a Taliban fighter leading a group up the slope, and fired. The man fell. She shifted, fired again. Another target down. Each shot was deliberate, calculated not just to kill but to sow confusion and fear. "Left ridge, 200 meters," Davis called out, spotting targets through his scope. Riley swung her rifle, found the fighters Davis had identified, and dropped 2 of them before they could take cover. The others scattered, their advance broken by an invisible death they couldn't fight. "Moving," Riley announced, and the team bounded down the slope in tactical leaps. She'd fire, they'd move. Then they'd cover while she repositioned. It was a deadly ballet, perfectly coordinated despite having never trained together. They reached the goat path, barely 18 inches wide, carved into the mountainside by decades of animal traffic. On one side was rock face, on the other a 100-foot drop to jagged boulders below. They moved single file, exposed, vulnerable. An RPG streaked past them, so close Davis felt the heat wash. It impacted the cliff face above, showering them with rock fragments. Jackson stumbled, nearly going over the edge, but Blake grabbed his vest and hauled him back. "They've got our position," Santos shouted. Riley spun, spotted the RPG team reloading 300 meters away, and took the shot. The gunner dropped. She fired again. The loader collapsed. The weapon fell silent. "Keep moving," she commanded. "They'll have mortar crews setting up. We need to be off this path before they find the range." They ran along the treacherous goat path, and Davis marveled at Riley's tactical instincts. She wasn't just reacting to threats. She was thinking 3 steps ahead, anticipating enemy movements, positioning the team to exploit every piece of cover and concealment the terrain offered. A burst of machine gun fire ripped across the path behind them, too close. Davis turned and saw fighters on an adjacent hillside, perhaps 400 meters away, setting up a PKM to rake their position. Riley, machine gun team are 4 o'clock. She was already moving, finding a stable shooting position on the narrow path. Through her scope, she assessed the shot: long range, moving targets, unstable platform. She controlled her breathing, let her body settle despite standing on an 18-inch wide ledge with a 100-foot drop beside her. She fired twice, both gunners fell. "How the hell?" Jackson started. "Stop being impressed and start moving," Riley snapped. "We're not clear yet." They reached the creek bed, a dried watercourse that offered more cover but also channeled them into a predictable route. Riley knew it was a risk, but they needed the concealment. Taliban fighters were converging from every direction now, a coordinated manhunt. Blake's radio crackled with intercepted communications. "They're calling in reinforcements from surrounding villages. I'm hearing numbers like 200 fighters, maybe more. And they're setting up blocking positions on all the major routes out of the valley." "Then we don't take the major routes," Riley said. She led them off the creek bed into what looked like impenetrable thorn brush, but she knew a path through it, something she'd discovered during her weeks of surveillance. They pushed through the vegetation, thorns tearing at their uniforms, emerging into a narrow defile between two rock formations. "This leads to the abandoned compounds," Riley explained, moving with the confidence of someone who'd mapped every inch of this terrain. "It's the long way around, but it keeps us out of their search grid." They moved through the defile, and Davis realized they were following the same routes Riley had used for weeks: the hidden paths, the forgotten trails, the spaces between the Taliban's awareness. She turned the valley into her own personal hunting ground, and now she was using that knowledge to keep them alive. An explosion ahead, a compound they were approaching erupted in flames. Mortars had found it. "They're firing blind, hopping to flush us out," Riley assessed. "Or they're trying to herd us toward their blocking positions." "So what do we do?" Santos asked. Riley studied the burning compound, the surrounding terrain, the tactical situation. Davis could almost see her mind working through the variables, calculating odds, finding the solution that others would miss. "We go through the fire," she said simply. Jackson looked at her like she was insane. "Through a burning building." "They're watching the perimeter, expecting us to go around. They won't expect us to go straight through the flames." Riley checked her watch. "Plus, it'll mask our thermal signature from any drones they might have up." Davis wanted to argue, but he'd seen enough to trust her instincts. "You heard her. We go through." They approached the burning compound, heat radiating in waves. The building was a maze of rooms and corridors, flames consuming the wooden beams, smoke so thick it was like pushing through water. Riley led them through, somehow knowing which walls were stable and which were about to collapse, which rooms were still passable and which were death traps. They emerged on the far side, covered in soot and ash, coughing from smoke inhalation, but alive and having gained crucial distance on their pursuers. "The confusion won't last long," Riley warned, checking her ammunition. She was down to 3 magazines, less than 100 rounds. "They'll figure out we went through eventually." "How much further to Morrison's position?" Davis asked. Riley consulted her mental map. 2 kilometers, but it's the worst 2 kilometers in the valley. Open ground in places, multiple sight lines, and we have to cross the main road where they'll definitely have patrols. Blake's radio crackled with urgent chatter. "The 2 SEALs with Morrison are calling for help. Enemy patrol found their position. They're engaging now, but they're almost out of ammunition." Davis felt ice in his veins. Morrison and Chen were already dying. Now they were under direct attack with almost no way to defend themselves. Riley was already running. double time. If Morrison's position falls, this entire mission was for nothing. They raced across the valley, throwing caution aside now, speed more important than stealth. Riley led them through terrain that seemed impossible to cross, cliff edges, thorny ravines, boulder fields that threatened to break ankles with every step. She was pushing them beyond their limits, and they followed because they had no choice. Gunfire echoed ahead, the distinctive crack of American M4s, outnumbered by the heavier sounds of AK-47s and PKMs. "Morrison's position 300 meters, Davis shouted. They crested a ridge and saw it, the dried riverbed where they'd left their commander, now swarming with Taliban fighters. Rodriguez and Williams were fighting desperately, their backs literally against the wall, firing their last rounds to protect Morrison and Chen's unconscious forms. Riley dropped to one knee and became death itself. Her rifle sang its deadly song, precise, methodical, unstoppable. Every shot was a kill. Every trigger pull ended a threat. She fired with such speed and accuracy that the Taliban fighters couldn't understand where the shots were coming from, why their brothers kept falling, what invisible force was cutting through them. Davis and the others joined in, their combined fire devastating the enemy assault. The Taliban fighters broke and scattered, unable to withstand the sudden overwhelming firepower that had materialized from nowhere. Riley sprinted down the slope, the others following. They reached Morrison's position just as Rodriguez fired his last bullet. "Jesus, am I glad to see you," Rodriguez breathed, slumping against the riverbank. Morrison was still alive, barely. His face was gray, his breathing shallow, but his eyes were clear. "Manser." "Dead," Riley confirmed. "Clean kill. The attack on Fob Lightning won't happen." Morrison smiled weakly. "Then it was worth it." "Don't talk like you're dying yet, Commander," Riley said, checking his wounds. "We didn't come all this way to lose you now." But Davis could see the truth. Morrison had lost too much blood. Chen hadn't moved in hours, and they were still surrounded by hundreds of enemy fighters who wanted them dead. Riley stood, scanning the surrounding mountains as dawn fully broke across the valley. She keyed her radio to the emergency frequency. "Any station, this is Reaper Actual. I have 6 American personnel requiring immediate CASEVAC. Grid coordinates to follow. Be advised, landing zone is hot. I repeat, LZ is hot." Static, then a response. "Reaper, this is Viper Flight. We're 10 minutes out with gun support. Hold your position." Riley looked at Morrison, at the wounded and exhausted SEALs, at the mountains around them still crawling with enemies. 10 minutes. They just had to survive 10 more minutes. "All right, boys," she said, reloading her rifle with her last magazine. "One more time. Let's show them why Americans don't quit." The enemy was coming, but so was their ride home, Part 8, Dawn's Extraction, 900 words. The sound of rotor blades was the most beautiful thing Davis had ever heard, but they were still 8 minutes away. 8 minutes that felt like an eternity when the entire valley was converging on their position. "They're regrouping for a final push," Blake shouted, watching Taliban fighters mass behind a ridgeline 300 meters away. "I count at least 60, maybe more. They know we're almost out of ammunition. They're going to rush us." Riley surveyed their defensive position with a tactical eye. The riverbed offered decent cover but terrible fields of fire. Once the enemy closed to 100 meters, it would become a shooting gallery, with the SEALs as the targets. "Rodriguez, Williams, how many rounds total?" she asked. "Maybe 40 between us," Rodriguez admitted. "Most of our magazines went to keeping Morrison and Chen alive through the night." Riley checked her own ammunition, 23 rounds left. Davis and the others weren't much better off. Against 60-plus fighters, the math was brutally simple. They'd run dry long before the enemy did. Morrison tried to sit up, his face twisted with pain. "Riley, you need to leave us. Take my men and—" "Shut up, Commander," Riley said without malice. She was busy unpacking something from her vest, small rectangular devices that Davis recognized as M18 Claymore mines. "I've been hauling these things around for 3 weeks waiting for the right moment. Looks like I found it." She handed them to Blake. "You're the demolitions expert. Can you set these up along our likely enemy approach routes in 3 minutes?" Blake's eyes lit up. "Hell yes, I can." "Then move." Santos string comms wire between them. "I want command detonation, not tripwires." Riley turned to Davis. "Chief, you and Jackson start prepping Morrison and Chen for immediate evacuation. The second those birds touch down, we need to be loading, not fumbling." Davis nodded, understanding. Riley had gone from sniper to squad leader seamlessly, and her commands were so logical, so clearly the right tactical decisions, that everyone simply obeyed. The Taliban fighters began their assault, a coordinated advance under covering fire from machine guns and RPGs positioned on surrounding heights. They moved in classic infantry tactics, bounding by teams, using terrain for cover. These weren't random insurgents. They were experienced fighters executing a practiced assault. Riley settled behind her rifle, and the transformation Davis had seen before happened again. She became something other than human, a weapon given flesh and purpose. Her first shot dropped the enemy platoon commander. Her second killed a machine gunner. Each shot was placed not just to kill but to create maximum psychological impact, targeting leaders and heavy weapons operators, breaking the enemy's cohesion. "They're spreading out trying to flank us," Santos called. "Let them," Riley said calmly. "Blake, you ready with those claymores?" "Set and waiting." The Taliban fighters closed to 200 meters, then 150. They were shouting now, working themselves into the battle fury that made them such dangerous opponents. Riley kept firing, each shot a masterpiece of precision, but there were too many targets and too few bullets. At 100 meters, Blake triggered the claymores. The directional mines erupted in sequence, sending 700 steel balls through the air at lethal velocity. The leading edge of the Taliban assault simply disintegrated. Men screamed, fell, died. The attack staggered, momentum broken by the unexpected devastation. "Viper flight 4 minutes out," the radio crackled. "We see smoke from your position, marking LZ now." Riley threw a purple smoke grenade into the riverbed, the signal for extraction. The smoke billowed up, beautiful and terrible, a beacon that told the pilots where to land, but also told every enemy in the valley exactly where the Americans were. The remaining Taliban fighters, enraged by their losses, launched a desperate final assault. They came screaming over the ridgelines, firing from the hip, beyond tactics now, pure fury driving them forward. Riley's rifle went empty. She dropped it and pulled her sidearm, a Sig Sauer P226 that looked small in her hands but fired with the same devastating accuracy. Every shot found its mark, but they kept coming. Davis fired his last magazine. Jackson's rifle clicked empty. One by one, the SEALs ran dry, reduced to pistols and the few grenades they had left. 30 seconds, the pilot called. "We're coming in hot." The sound of the Black Hawks was thunder now, accompanied by the deeper roar of Apache gunships. The Apache opened up with their M230 chain guns, 30 rounds tearing into the surrounding ridgelines, suppressing enemy positions with overwhelming firepower. The Black Hawks came in fast and steep, their door gunners firing continuously, laying down such heavy fire that the Taliban assault faltered. The lead helicopter touched down in the riverbed, rotor wash blasting dust and debris everywhere. "Move, move, move," Davis screamed, grabbing Morrison under the arms. Jackson and Santos carried Chen between them, running for the helicopter through a storm of bullets and debris. Riley stood in the open, her pistol barking steadily, covering their retreat. She was completely exposed, firing with both hands now, a second pistol appearing from somewhere, dual-wielding like some kind of action movie hero, except this was real, and the bullets were real, and Davis realized she was deliberately drawing fire to protect them. "Riley, get on the bird," Davis shouted. She ignored him, firing until both pistols were empty. A bullet caught her in the shoulder, spinning her around. Another hit her vest, cracking ribs. She stumbled but didn't fall, pulling a final magazine from her vest, reloading with bloody hands. The second Black Hawk touched down. Rodriguez and Williams scrambled aboard, pulling Morrison and Chen to safety. The pilots were screaming to leave. The Apache were running low on ammunition. The entire valley was collapsing in on them. Davis ran back for Riley. She was still standing, still firing, but she was swaying now, blood soaking her uniform. He grabbed her and physically dragged her toward the helicopter. "I can still," she protested weakly. "You've done enough," Davis shouted over the rotor noise. "You've saved us all, now let us save you." They tumbled into the Black Hawk together as a wave of Taliban fighters crested the ridge. The door gunner opened up with his M134 minigun, the 6 rotating barrels screaming, 6,000 rounds per minute creating an impenetrable wall of lead. "We're up," the pilot called, and the helicopter lurched into the sky. Riley collapsed against the bulkhead, her rifle clutched to her chest like a child holding a teddy bear. Morrison reached out with a shaking hand and grasped hers. No words were necessary. He was alive. Chen was alive. All 8 of them were going home. Through the open door, Davis watched the valley fall away. That deadly, beautiful, terrible place where Riley McKenna had hunted alone for weeks, where she'd saved their lives, where she'd proven that sometimes legends are real and heroes exist. Riley's eyes found his. Despite her wounds, despite her exhaustion, there was something fierce and unbroken in that gaze. "The mission?" she asked. "Complete," Davis confirmed. "Mansur's dead. Fob Lightning is safe. 312 troops get to go home because of what you did." She nodded, satisfied, then looked at Morrison. "Your call saved them, Commander. You made the hard choice. That takes a different kind of courage than what I have." Morrison smiled through his pain. "You're wrong, Marine. Coming back for us when you could have disappeared into those mountains. That's the bravest thing I've ever seen." The helicopters banked hard, heading for friendly territory, leaving the valley behind. The Apache made a final gun run, their chain guns lighting up the dawn. Then they too turned for home. Riley closed her eyes, finally allowing herself to rest. For 18 months she'd been at war, with the enemy, with herself, with the grief that drove her. Today, for the first time since David died, she felt something other than the mission. She felt connection, brotherhood, the knowledge that she'd saved lives instead of just taking them. "Hey, Reaper," Jackson said, applying pressure to her shoulder wound. "What are you going to do after this? Where will you go?" Riley opened her eyes and looked at the sky beyond the helicopter door, vast, blue, infinite with possibility. For so long she'd thought she had no future, that she was just a weapon to be used until she broke. But maybe there was more. Maybe David would want her to live, not just survive. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I think I'm finally ready to find out." Morrison squeezed her hand weakly. "When you figure it out, you let me know. My team owes you a debt we can never repay. Anything you need, Marine, anything at all." The Black Hawks crossed into friendly airspace. Below them, Afghanistan stretched out in all its harsh beauty, a land of warriors and tragedy, of courage and sacrifice, where ordinary people did extraordinary things because someone had to. Riley McKenna looked at the SEALs around her, these men who'd trusted her, fought beside her, refused to leave her behind. Then she looked at her rifle, that instrument of death she'd carried for so long. Maybe it was time to put it down. Maybe she'd done enough. Or maybe the world still needed warriors like her. Maybe the fight was never really over. Maybe some people were forged for battle and couldn't exist without it. She didn't have the answer yet. But for the first time in 9 months, she was asking the question. and that perhaps was a kind of victory all its own. The helicopters flew on toward the sunrise, carrying 8 warriors who'd stared into death and refused to blink, who'd made impossible choices and lived with impossible costs, who'd proven that sometimes the difference between survival and destruction is one person willing to take one perfect shot. Behind them, in a valley that would remember this day forever, the legend of the female sniper who feared no one grew larger still. They would tell stories about her for years: the ghost who hunted Taliban commanders, the Marine who saved a SEAL team, the woman called Reaper who brought death to America's enemies and hope to America's warriors. But Riley McKenna, flying toward an uncertain future with blood on her hands and pain in her body, and something like peace beginning to grow in her heart, was ready to be something more than a legend. She was ready to be human again.